that's the big challenge of a company. How do you continue to get better as you get bigger? And it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of focus. Like I'm in our training center today at Breeze, and I just addressed a brand new flight attendant class that started. I talked to a brand new class of our technicians that work on the airplanes. And we, you have to be able to communicate, put people in the huddle, make them feel like they're part of something that's greater than each of us. And you're creating an extraordinary company. And that's what we did at JetBlue. It ran on those fumes for a long, long time.
Hello, and welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodeling. Today's guest is David Neeleman. David Neeleman is a serial entrepreneur who has built and sold multiple airlines and is widely regarded as one of the key innovators in the aviation field. His past companies include Morris Air, which he sold to Southwest Airlines in 1993, JetBlue Airlines, Azul Airlines in Brazil, and most recently, Breeze Airways. He's regarded for effectively inventing ticketless billing and in-seat entertainment, among many other key innovations in the field. In today's conversation, we discuss his approach to leadership, his experience building and selling multiple companies, how he's built ownership-first cultures, and much more. David, welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Very excited for today's conversation. Long time admirer. So you're an incredibly successful entrepreneur. You've built and sold multiple companies. I could spend today's interview solely talking about your accomplishments. I actually want to start with a crucible moment in your career. In 1993, you sold Morris Air to Southwest. You're there working for your idol, Herb Kelleher. And after 6 months or so, unfortunately, it doesn't work out and you get let go. I would love to hear about what happened at Southwest. You finally joined this company that you had idolized for so long. What happened, and then what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I was a young entrepreneur. When we sold the company, I was 33 years old, and it was kind of my first big win in life. And I'll start with the lesson I learned. When you build a company and you sell it and you get, I don't know, I got like about $20 million or $25 million in Southwest Airlines stock. And I thought, wow, this is the American dream. You start a company, you sell it, you have all this money. But I was so miserable. I was just absolutely miserable because it was my baby. And they didn't see it the way I did. They didn't, they wanted to change things. And so I just thought, well, I'm going to make this work. So Herb asked me to be part of what was called the Executive Planning Committee. So I went down there and I just noticed so many things as a company that they had been around for so long. At that time, it's a lot longer now, but there were some things that I just thought they could do better. And I got them to be ticketless, the first airline that was ticketless. I got them to put a heads-up display in their airplanes so they wouldn't have to divert their planes as often. I integrated the Morris with they thought it'd take a year. I did it in 3 months. One of the big things is they were charging off-peak fares on Sunday, which was our highest fares of the week. So I changed all that, which gave them $50 million. But I was just a young, impetuous guy, and I would just go burst into people's offices and say, why are we doing this? This is crazy. And so when Herb sat down with me, I can still remember at Ruth Chris Steakhouse by Love Field in Dallas, and he said, look, I appreciate all you've done. You've been amazing for this company, but it should have taken you 3 years to do this. You did it in 6 months, and you ticked everybody off, and now everybody wants you to go. So I have no choice but to fire you. So, it was a big learning experience for me. I wouldn't change it, obviously, in that case, because, it created a lot of great things after that. And one of the things I've learned, and you'll probably get to this, but when one door closes, another one always opens.
A fascinating experience of hearing about your experience as an entrepreneur joining a company. You come in a little bit of a bull in a china shop, maybe out the gate, used to operating in founder mode, and then all of a sudden you're in a larger organization, you need to change your leadership approach. I want to actually zoom back earlier in your life to before Morris Air, how you got into aviation to begin with. You didn't come from a family of pilots or anything like that. And so maybe you could share your origin story of what got you into this world to begin with.
Well, it's funny because when I was at JetBlue, our head of PR at the time, Gareth Edmondson Jones, called my parents and said, do you have some pictures of David as a young child? so we can use them for promotional stuff. And they found a picture with me. I think it was my third birthday. I had a Tarzan suit on, and I had this cake, and there was a big airplane on it. And they said, "That's it. That's when you started loving airplanes." And I don't think that was the case, but it was a good story. We flew. My dad was a foreign correspondent for United Press International. He had served his mission for our church down in Brazil and loved the country, loved the people. So he decided to take a job down there, and I was born. I was born in Brazil, and so we traveled back and forth by airplane. So that was kind of my first experience with airplanes. But I think it was just more, later in life, I found out in my 30s after I left Southwest, I found out I had attention deficit disorder, and everyone likes to say they have it today. But in my brand of ADD, I have the ability to just kind of look at complex situations and try and simplify them, and kind of be an innovator. Kind of the first airline that had ticketless travel, the first airline that had live TV on the airplanes. And I could just look at complex things and say, why can't we do it this way? And at the time, the airline business was just something that really needed innovation. It was really bad with the paper tickets and old airplanes and cloth seats and all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of thrived in that industry, and I think that's what got me into it.
I know ADD is actually a pretty common trait among entrepreneurs. I think it's maybe a sign that they don't work particularly well in a traditional organizational structure. It's both a blessing and a curse. How have you harnessed that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think it's really important to know your limits and know what you're good at and know what you're not good at, and to be able to surround yourself with people that can push back. Not people that, are going to just say yes to everything you say, but force you to use facts and data to be able to kind of come to a conclusion that's really better for the company. So, yeah, also I have a great assistant that's been with me for 26 years that kind of keeps everything in order, and not everybody can do that, obviously. So it's really important that you use your reminders on your phone, that you set deadlines, that you organize your day and checklists and all that kind of stuff to be able to 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 understand. Early on in my career, I kind of came up with this principle called MIN. I didn't develop it, I read about it, but it was the most important now. So being able to really prioritize your life and your professional life, your personal life, with these MINs, and put the MINs at the top of the list and make sure that you deal with those first. But little mundane things like just paying the bills is just torture, and you tend to procrastinate those things that aren't exciting in your life.
I want to move from your origin story to your, Morris Air, Southwest, and then to JetBlue. What was the original kind of impetus or excitement around founding JetBlue? Why did you decide the world needed another airline?
Well, I had a 5-year non-compete, and it was interesting because I just started telling the story after Herb and Jim Parker have both passed away. Shortly after the sale, Herb asked me if I would. They said, Justice Department wants to speak to you in Washington, D.C. And so I said, okay, give me some free tickets. I'll take my family to D.C. and I'll meet with Justice Department. And so when I showed up back there, the general counsel for Southwest was there. And they said, oh, you've got a 5-year, no, they said, you sold the business. Now what are you going to do? And I said, well, I have a non-compete. And they said, how long's your non-compete? And I said, 5 years. And they kind of looked over at the general counsel, and he waved them off and said, oh, we know it's not enforceable. So I looked at him like, really? And I was just a young kid. I really didn't understand all that stuff. So I went back and called Herb and said, hey, it's not enforceable. He goes, well, I'll sue you, and I'll make sure I take all your money away if you even try. I may lose, but I don't want you. You're the last person I ever want to see in the airline business. So I got a call from someone in Calgary, Canada, and asked if I could help them found WestJet Airlines, which is a very successful airline in Western Canada and all over Canada now and internationally. So I did that. And then I also founded the first ticketless reservation system with my partner, Dave Evans, who was the technology genius behind it. And that company today is a very successful company worth over $1 billion. It's owned by Amadeus. So I just kind of bided my time, during that 5-year period of time. I thought I would just honor it because I said I would. And then about 4 years in, I started working on JetBlue. And I knew that there was just something that was really missing from the airline business. And I learned a lot at Southwest. I really did. I learned that if you bought new airplanes, it was actually cheaper than getting old airplanes. And so I was able to raise money.
And why is that? Because of maintenance costs?
Yeah, maintenance costs and just how you finance them, and they're more reliable, they're more fuel efficient. Just a lot of factors that go into it if you're going to highly utilize the airplanes. Reliability, maintenance costs, and obviously fuel economy. So I looked at the industry and said, "Wow, it's just terrible." So I combined, and then I was while I was in this process of getting through the non-compete, I saw that there were business jets flying around with TVs, live television. And I had an experience with a cloth seat on another airline where somebody had urinated in the seat and I sat in the seat. So I said, okay, I'm going to go with leather seats. I'm going to go with live television. I'm going to go with new airplanes, and I'm going to put it in New York because JFK was a really underutilized airport. And all those things just came together to make it a fabulous success. I mean, we started in February of 2000, and then you had 9/11 in September 1, but then in April of 2002, we went public, and first day closed at a 1.7 billion market cap, which was higher than the stock has recently traded at JetBlue. So all those forces came together, and it was a really strong, for years and years. We were so far ahead of everybody else.
Yeah. I remember when I was in college, I grew up in Oakland, California, and I went to college on the East Coast. And so I'd fly Oakland or SFO to Boston. And I remember the difference when I was going for, American Airlines or a Delta flight or United, I would be all bummed. But if I had JetBlue flight, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have 6 hours of TV time. This is going to be unbelievable. This is going to be a great experience. I felt like at that time, and still to this day, JetBlue is just the customer service and customer experience is so much elevated. I've heard you say before that JetBlue is a customer service company that happens to own airplanes, which is a great line. How did you, a lot of people talk the talk about being customer obsessed, but it seems that JetBlue, my own personal experience, is the company walks the walk. How did you ensure that the whole company was behind that vision, even though, you were kind of dictating it from the top?
Well, it was easy in the beginning. I think the challenge, for JetBlue today is that everybody has live TV. Everybody has United Delta. You walk on a brand new airplane, leather seats. They emulated a lot of what JetBlue did. It took them decades to be able to get all that fleet renewed and go through bankruptcy, which they all did, and clean everything up. But in the beginning, it's easy. People have a cause. It's not just a company that they work for, but it's really something special. And that's we'll get to it. But Breeze today, I'm living that all over again. But and that's one of the amazing things about Southwest Airlines is they've been around for a very long time, and they've gone through their really rough parts lately. But by and large, they have a really great culture. JetBlue has a good culture. It's certainly not exactly the way it was when we founded it years ago, but that's the big challenge of a company. How do you continue to get better as you get bigger? And it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of focus. Like I'm in our training center today at Breeze, and I just addressed a brand new flight attendant class that started. I talked to a brand new class of our technicians that work on the airplanes. And we, you have to be able to communicate, put people in the huddle, make them feel like they're part of something that's greater than each of us. And you're creating an extraordinary company. And that's what we did at JetBlue. It ran on those fumes for a long, long time.
When you left JetBlue, how many employees was it, roughly?
Probably 20. Probably 15,000.
15,000?
Yes.
It's interesting. I've worked at a number of companies that are in this kind of hyper growth phase. I started my own company, got to 20 employees, another company from 20 to 120. I was at YouTube when it was like 400 employees, now it's 7,000. When you expand and scale, you go from missionaries to mercenaries working at your company. There are people who weren't there for the founding moments. They don't necessarily breathe that original DNA. How did you maintain that obsession, that culture, that passion for customer service once it got to 15,000 employees?
I think it was a lot of it is through leadership and leadership training, because everybody has to be singing the same song, and they have to be able to. People have to want to come to work. They have to at least make it neutral, so you don't hate going to work. And so a lot of that is done through leadership training, where we created a leadership course where people had principles of leadership that they wore on their ID badges, around their necks. They have these IDs, and they would have these things that they could read every day and talk about how it was all about servant leadership. So, you can do that initially. It's actually easier today, I think, because we have teams, and we have teams calls with all of our employee groups on a weekly or bi-monthly basis, where we can communicate with them and talk to them and have an open, transparent question and answer session. But it's a big challenge.
Turn uncertainty into your competitive edge. Franklin Covey's guide, How Leaders Convert Disruption into Opportunity, helps you anchor in purpose, communicate transparently, and turn vision into action. Grab your free copy from the show notes and harness chaos to fuel your organization's success. Before I get to Breeze, I want one kind of final question on the JetBlue experience, and this is the second crucible moment of your career I want to talk to, the Valentine's Day crisis, the ice storm, kind of big customer service challenge. Maybe talk me through what happened on that day with JetBlue, and then kind of what was the ramification, and again, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, what I learned from that experience was that you got to.
Oh, and maybe just, sorry, for our listeners that aren't as familiar, just if you could briefly summarize what happened.
Sure. So we have a big ice storm coming to the East Coast this weekend, but it was for 1 year, the FAA came up with this thing that said if there's ice pellets, which is kind of in between snow and rain, that you couldn't take off. And so I wasn't running the operation day to day. Ironically, the person that was running the operation day to day was made the CEO after I left, which was obviously wasn't the best decision. But so the planes got stuck out on the runway, and then it started to snow, and then it ice, and so people were stranded on airplanes for a long period of time, 6-7 hours, and then there was a lot of cancellations, and then it was 3 days of putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, getting the right crews with the right airplanes, and it was made worse. It happens all the time today, but at that point in time, we were such a darling, and we were in New York, so we were on the Today Show. I was actually on Letterman, the whole thing. And so we got to put back together again. And then I went on a PR tour. I started with Today Show in the morning, ended with Letterman at night. I did 34 live interviews explaining what happened, explaining why it would never happen again. But oddly and strangely, weirdly, our board decided that maybe I was just too involved in the business and founder syndrome, whatever. It was a really bad decision. And they decided to just say, look, you step back to be the CEO, you be the chairman of the company, we'll still have you involved. It really didn't work out that way. So after a year, I just said, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. And the reason I left was because I wanted to go to Brazil to start an airline, because I was born in Brazil. I always, as a missionary myself, I kind of always had in the back of my mind, I wanted to come down and do something for the country. So I wrote an email to all of our crew members at the time, and I said, look, life's not really fair. It's not really what happens to you, it's how you deal with it. And that's how I've always lived my life, and I've asked you to do the same. So I'm going to go to the country of my birth, and I'm going to try and do something special down there. But I wish you all the best. And man, that was hard. It took me years to get over that, really. And what I learned was boards are looking through a knothole. They just look through a little knothole. They think they know everything. They really know very little. And the fact that the person they made the CEO had been really organized with the board and board books and all that kind of stuff, they thought that maybe that person could run the company better, and so they thought they were making the right decision, which I don't, like I said, it's I don't believe it was. But for me personally, and for the people of Brazil and the people that work at Azul, it was the best decision ever, because Azul would not exist today. And by far the biggest impact on humanity that I've ever done is go to Brazil and start what today is the largest airline in Brazil. So again, door shuts, another one opens, and I think it's really worked out that it was the best thing. Although maybe not for the shareholders or people who were at JetBlue during that aftermath time.
It's so impressive to hear the kind of mindset that you've been able to bring to your work in these couple of very difficult moments where things didn't work out. Your baby gets taken from you first, Morris Air at Southwest, and now the experience at JetBlue, and yet you find the silver lining and you kind of come back, the phoenix rising from the ashes, stronger than before. Where does that come from?
I think. I don't know. I mean, when I just got through talking to our flight attendant class, like I said before, and I talked about Viktor Frankl, being in a really difficult position in a Nazi concentration camp, and he, the when he knew that he could control his own emotion, that was what made him survive. And I think it's, you have a couple choices in life. You can be miserable, or you can just move on and be positive and make the best out of a worse situation. And maybe I've just through challenges in my life, I've learned how to do that. And I think if everyone could do that, there'd be maybe a lot more happy people in this world.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Viktor Frankl there. Franklin Covey, our founder, Stephen Covey, wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the first habit, be proactive, is all about, the space between kind of an action and then your reaction to it. And in that moment, you have a choice. And he talks about Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning and how much that inspired him to develop this habit. So I think that concept is very much in our DNA as well.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, 16,000 people work at Azul today, 1,000 flights a day, carries 100,000 people, a day, 40 million people. And probably half of those people have come out of poverty in Brazil. So as far as changing lives and making a difference in the world, we serve probably 100 different communities that nobody else serves. In the Amazon basin, you either go on Azul, or you go 4 days on a boat. And so we bring life-saving medicines and vaccines and all that to regions of Brazil that nobody has flown for many decades.
That's incredible. What's your personal transition being a leader in the U.S. context, in Salt Lake City, in New York, and then I know Brazil was where you were born. You went on a mission there. You go to Brazil. How did you have to adapt your leadership style to a totally different culture?
Yeah, it was interesting because I brought a group of Americans down with me that were at JetBlue. And some of them spoke Portuguese. One of them had served his mission in Portugal, who's now the CEO today. John Rogers said he's doing a fabulous job. Trey Bond, who dated a Brazilian girl at Harvard, just a whole collection. Jason Ward, who served his mission in Argentina. And we got down there, and you had these great Brazilians. That the work, it was just a different culture, because Americans would say, "Hey, I emailed this guy, and he didn't respond until the next day." And so we had to kind of get that straightened out. And then it was the Americans just wanted to eat or at their desks, have a sandwich and eat at their desk. And all the Brazilians wanted to go for an hour and go to our company lunchroom and have a lunch and be social, which there's real positives in that as well. So we kind of took the best of both, worked together, and created a really great company.
That's awesome. So now let's talk about Breeze, your kind of latest company. Very interesting airway, very interesting strategy, kind of point to point, going with less competitive markets, less competitive routes. What got you into that? What was the kind of moment of inspiration that led to that business model? Maybe you could just explain the business model a little bit more clearly than I just attempted to, and then kind of talk about your motivation for it.
So, I'm down in Brazil. I'm going back and forth every week. And so then I just kind of slowly turned the reins over to the management team, still the chairman of the company. And so I had a group of people back that were former JetBlue people and others that were saying, "Hey, why don't we do this again?" And so I'm thinking to myself, do I really want to do this again? This is a lot. And so I thought, well, let's do it. So I put in some money, hired some people, and then COVID hit. Oh my gosh, it was absolutely terrible. And unlike all the other airlines that were actually flying, who got paid billions of dollars by the U.S. government, we got virtually nothing. Some payroll reimbursement for a short period of time. And so it's really like we were pregnant with it, and I had, my stock at Azul became worth nothing basically because of COVID, and I had TAP Airlines over in Portugal that I did as well, and I'd sold that to Lufthansa, but they didn't go through because of COVID. And so I had to go raise money. The last thing I wanted to do was have investors again. But I had to go raise money and do it again. But I did it because the people were already here and they were already working. And I assembled a cross section of JetBlue people with former Allegiant people, with also from different airlines, and we just kind of hit on this concept. And I think part of it we lucked into, some of it we were just smarter. We bought some brand new airplanes, as we did at JetBlue. These airplanes were a little smaller. They had lower trip costs, and from the people that came from Allegiant, they taught me that, and I learned this in Brazil too, because if we flew on routes that we had no competition on, we just did better. And so 80% of the routes in Brazil, we have no competition. And about 87% of the routes we have here in the United States, we have no competition on. And so the mantra became, we'll get you there twice as fast for half the price. And we're not going to get you there 5 times a day or even maybe a daily, but let's just travel you on the days you really actually want to go on, Thursdays and Fridays, Sundays, Mondays. And then let's create a premium section for the airplane. Let's segment it so we can put you in first class. We can put you in extra legroom seats. We can do extra legroom seats. We can say the cheapest fare, and then we can give you free Wi-Fi if you want that, if you push us up. So it's been great. I mean, we're finally making money. COVID was really tough and getting all the pilots certified, but now we're really focused on becoming the number one on-time airline in the country. We try never to cancel a flight. We went 50,000 flights with one single cancellation over a period of 6 months. So we have about, by the end of this year, we'll have about 3,000 people. And I have, like I said, weekly calls with pilots and flight attendants, technicians every other week, team members every other week. So I can touch about 1,500 people a month personally, talking one-to-one using the technology we have today. But it's a high NPS score, great customer satisfaction, really trying to become extraordinary in everything that we do. And it's a lot more fun when you're winning than when you're not winning. So we're getting to that point now where everything seems to be working for us.
One of the things that I've admired most in reading your background and story is your customer obsession at JetBlue and how you really embedded yourself in the flying experience. You would fly dozens of routes. You would serve snacks on airplanes. You would talk to the pilot. You really got the ground truth instead of just letting reports cascade up. You're now older and richer and, probably wiser. And do you still do that? Are you like on the Raleigh to Cancun route serving peanuts, or are you?
No, not as much. And it's not because what was great at JetBlue is our offices were 10 minutes from the airport. And I could just get in my car and drive out there and work the line. I had my ID, so I could go underneath and load luggage, play basketball with folks on the ramp. So that was proximity. We are spread out in 80 different cities today, and so I could make a big effort to get to Norfolk and see 10 people, or I can still do that, and I do from time to time, but not nearly as often. Or I can just be totally accessible, do these Teams calls where we have a chat groups that are open. Our pilot chat groups open all week long, so anyone can make any comment anytime. So there are different ways to do it, and I think the most important way is to touch the most people the most period of time, is to have these weekly calls where we can all be transparent and I can communicate. I can talk about the company, the industry, and listen to all their suggestions. I think it's a more efficient way of doing it today.
Are there any other kind of unconventional leadership approaches that you've taken that you found to be wildly impactful across all these companies?
I think it's really, obviously it goes back to servant leadership, but it's just making sure you have great leaders that inspire people to be their best. One of our chief operating officer said yesterday, we had somebody that was coming in. One of the innovative things that I we're doing right now at Breeze is because we're scattered out in 80 different cities, and planes break from time to time, and there's logistics challenges. We just purchased 2 Learjets to be able to recover, to send crews around and to have technicians go fix airplanes and all that. So we brought someone in to run the program who lasted like just a few days. He just said, this is a lot. And our COO said, well, I don't think people understand the pace of this company. You've got to really be with it every day. And unless you get in here and understand the pace and moving quickly, when you're in it, it's fun and you're accomplishing a lot, and safety's top of the pyramid, but we're adding a lot of cities and adding a lot of new routes and adding a plane every 3 weeks. But unless you're ready for that pace, then, it's not a place for you.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to, before we go on to our kind of closing lightning round and then final question, I just want to briefly go from the professional to the personal. You've referenced a couple of times today your faith, your mission to Brazil. How has faith guided the way that you showed up at work and you think has led you to become the person you are?
Well, foundational to our religion, the religion I believe in, is that we're all sons and daughters of God. Actual sons and daughters of God, not some mystical thing. And so I think you have to, if you believe that, you have to treat everyone the same, and you have to be very egalitarian and love, your love for your people, and if people understand that you really care about them, I think that kind of guides everything. I mean, obviously, I was very undistinguished before my mission, and that really taught me discipline. It was really important for my life and for my career. But once but just having that understanding that, and then also that there's an eternal perspective. There are things in this life that are tragic and sad and get you down, but if you understand that this is just a blip, and that there's an eternal perspective, that we're literal offsprings of God, then I think it just gives you a better outlook on life and a more positive and hopeful outlook, that you could tend to look at things in the more positive than everything in the negative.
That's wonderful. The kind of other personal questions around family. So you have 10 kids. I mentioned before we hopped on the call, I'm about to have my first kid in 5 months, so I've got a lot of catching up to do. But how have you been able to balance being a father and being a business leader?
As the kids were growing up, and I could add too that we have 36 grandkids and 2 more on the way. So it's become
Congratulations. That's an expensive Christmas budget, though.
Yes.
I feel like let's hope Breeze works out so you can keep the toys coming.
And the free travel for the family. You got to stay on our own airline just to fly people to Orlando, like we did after the Christmas holidays. I tried never to work on the weekends. I kind of tried to keep that as sacred time for my kids. I'm in this industry group that meets kind of on Saturdays twice a year, and I hated it. I wanted to be home with my family. So not really time for friends, actually. And so if you just are focused on the family, no friends, weekends, you have a faith that you're in church on Sunday, and you sit around for family dinners and read scriptures before you go to bed at night or in the morning. It keeps you all grounded. And it's really a quality time thing versus maybe sometimes a quantity thing. But in addition to the weekends, my kids played sports. I tried to always duck out early and make it to their football games or lacrosse games or their performances, their dance performances for the girls. So yeah, it was just really keeping family number one, even though there were a lot of other things that tried to pull you away from that.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to move to three quick lightning round questions. First one is for somebody who flies all the time. What is the vacation that you've taken in the last year that you had the most fun on?
Well, just a few weeks ago, I didn't know this such a thing existed, but one of my daughters found these houses in Orlando that are a long row of houses. They all had 9 bedrooms each. So we got two side by side, took 45 family members down there and little kids walking in between. And it was just great to be together as a family. A few Costco runs, obviously ordering catering at night and, visiting the parks. We also, from time to time, have a house in the DR that fits us all that we like to go to. So any vacation for me that includes the whole family is a lot of fun.
That's great. We got the World Cup coming up in June. Brazil, let's say Brazil and U.S. face off. What flag are you flying?
Brazil, no doubt about it.
Really?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
no doubt. It means so much more to Brazil than anyone in the United States. But yeah, I doubt the U.S. will be there. And Brazil stumbled a little bit. They've won more World Cups than anyone else, but I'm Team Brazil for sure.
Okay, good. And then final lightning question for you. What is a leadership book that you find yourself recommending often?
For our business, it's not necessarily a leadership book, but it's an extraordinary, being extraordinary. It's called the Checklist Manifesto because safety is just so critical. One of the major factors in airline safety that changed everything was a checklist. When pilots are in the flight deck and they get their plastic cards out still today and they check things off, I'm a real big stickler on safety and making sure that being extraordinary, you can't do it without checklists. So that's one of the books. And by the way, we got a two or more planes dedicated to the World Cup this year. So we'll be flying a lot of the teams. So we're excited about that.
It's very fun. I hope you can get Brazil on one of your planes and meet a lot of your favorite players.
Absolutely.
So our closing question that we always ask is, Franklin Covey is obviously a leadership company. Who is a leader that you have learned a lot from in your life that you really admire and look up to? And what's a lesson we all can take from them?
Well, even though he fired me, I always looked up to Herb. Herb was really created an amazing culture at Southwest Airlines that lives on beyond him. Like I said, I was in this aviation club with him, and he's been known to drink a lot of wild turkey and smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day. And we were off on this at this remote location, and he would be there talking to the bartenders, and I'd be talking to him. We remained friends throughout his life. I was at his funeral, and he treated that bartender, young kid, as well as he treated anybody else. He loved people, and he loved to be with them and communicate with them, and that was a really important lesson I learned from Herb in creating a culture that I did at JetBlue, Azul, and now at Breeze.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed hearing all of your insights about your journey, and I hope I'm sure our listeners have as well. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And for all of our listeners, thank you for the time. Please share this episode with somebody who has flown JetBlue or Southwest or Breeze. Book your next travel on Breeze Airways. And thank you for the time. Hope to see you again next week for another episode of Franklin Covey on Leadership.